Hello and welcome to Stand in the Gap, where each week we select a leading cultural issue of great significance to all Americans. Issues that are often controversial, issues of substance, issues of a transcending nature that impact not only the current generation, but the next. Issues that seem to have no solution but desperately need one if freedom and the ability to enjoy our lives as we have for so long in this nation are to remain. I'm Sam Rohrer, and I'll be joined today again, as normal, by Pastor Isaac Crockett. Today's theme is marriage, and specifically, millennial marriage. Our title for today's program is this: The State of the Millennial Marriage Union. And this is part one. If I were to ask you about what you think is the state of the American families, you'd likely say that they are not in good shape, and if that's what you'd say, you'd be right. In fact, according to most research, in 1990, 28% of all children born in the United States were born out of wedlock, 28%. That means there's no father in the home. But that number grew from 28% in 1990 to 40% in 2016, with that percentage continuing to increase. But other factors such as the number of divorces, the number of couples living together without getting married, and other factors all describe the state of the marriage union, that it is weak and it is under assault. Today we'll describe in detail the state of the millennial marriage union. And according to research cited by one of our guests today, Dr. Jenn Murff, who is president of Millennials for Marriage, she said this, quote, "Millennials are abandoning marriage at an alarming rate, and this could have devastating effects on the future of our nation," end quote. Dr. Murff and her husband, Justin Murff, hold a passion for their millennial generation and that of Generation Z, which follows behind them. According to them, Millennials for Marriage does this. They, quote, "work to change the millennial generation's distorted perspectives on marriage and the family," end quote. And because of the critical nature of this subject today, I'd like to invite in immediately, right now, Dr. Jenn Murff, president of Millennials for Marriage, and her husband, Justin Murff, who is chairman of Millennials for Marriage, and together they homeschool their 4 children. Let me walk you into the program right now. Jenn and Justin, thank you for being with us. And I want to thank you also for your commitment to marriage and for actually deciding not to talk about it alone, but to actually do something about it. So thank you very much. And thanks for being with us.
Okay. Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Sam.
Jenn, let me go to you first, if I could here right now. In simple terms, what is the state of the millennial marriage union in America? And is it of such a nature that our leaders, our political leaders, our religious leaders, other societal leaders, is it something that they should be really concerned about?
Well, the family is the foundation of our nation. It's the foundation of our Christian heritage. And yes, we should be worried. We should be concerned. Millennials are abandoning marriage by the droves. There was a time in history where young people, they graduated high school, they went, to the military or went to college, found a spouse, got married, had a family, worked and provided for their families. But now there's been a shift in culture. There's been a shift when it comes to the idea of, is marriage even relevant in society today? And I think it is. I think marriage is a foundation in which we should build our nation. And so they're leaving marriage by the droves. And so instead of marrying, millennials are starting to cohabitate, which has become a big issue.
That is a big issue. And Justin, just in the last minute or two before we go to our first break here, let me ask you a question, because the statement that I read, you all have stated that the potential effects on our nation are devastating. I think it may be obvious to our viewers what they may be, but just cite some of those devastating effects if we don't turn around what's happening to the millennial marriage in America.
Sure. So marriage is being delayed, which means childbearing is being delayed. So we're actually seeing a potential risk of entering into a demographic winter in the United States, where it takes an average of 3 to grow the country, right? 1 to replace the husband, 1 to replace the wife, 1 child to grow the country. But if you're delaying marriage further and further, it makes having multiple children families near impossible for many, many people, as they're delaying childbirth well into their 30s and sometimes even into their 40s. The medical risks are exponentially greater. And so they're having fewer children, which in the end means less Americans to grow the country and to sustain our country's growth. Economically, as millennials are delaying marriage, it means they're also delaying buying homes. So as many of the baby boomers are looking to downsize out of their single family homes, who's going to step up and buy them? So we are potentially on the risk of facing an economic crisis, particularly in the real estate market, where there's not enough qualified buyers, either from taxes or from debt to income ratio or even to family household size, to actually move in and become qualified buyers in the marketplace. So just on those 2 grounds alone, there could be some disastrous potentials economically for the country.
And Justin, I want to add to that, when you factor into that, we have killed 65 million or so of our babies in abortion. We have eliminated an entire generation. So between delaying marriage and therefore the number of children and killing the ones we have, ladies and gentlemen, that does portend enormous economic impacts, if nothing else. Well, how do we get to this position? What are the causes? Why are millennials not marrying in light of these facts? We're going to talk about that when we come right back after this break.
Truth, flexible or permanent? The Bible, ancient history, or powerfully relevant? Culture, a reflection of enlightenment or warning signs? The pastor, commentator, or frontline combatant? Every day, American Pastors Network speaks to these questions where and when they matter. With hundreds of affiliate radio stations nationwide, a website and mobile app screening today's headlines through the twin lenses of the Bible and the Constitution, educating, informing, equipping. This is the American Pastors Network. The time is now to stand in the gap for truth.
Welcome back to our program, and today we're talking with our friends Justin and Jenn Murff. And if you're a regular viewer of our program, you've seen Justin a couple of times, and this is our first time to have them on together. They focus with the ministry they're with the ministry that focuses on marriage, especially in millennials and Generation Z. And in fact, their lives have kind of been centered around their ministry. They homeschool their 4 children, and they really try to put into practice what they're helping mentor with other people. And so, Jenn, I want to talk to you. Your doctorate and teaching is in this field really of marriage and what we've been talking about here. You're I'm looking here at some of your credentials, and so you're the CEO or the president of Millennials for Marriage. You are an adjunct professor at a couple of universities, and you homeschool. A lot of these things all going on together, but it also gives you a lot of data. In fact, you've done some top-notch research in this field, and so you're the go-to person. That's why you all are on today for the research and this. And so let's just to cut straight to the point. What would you say would be a top reason, maybe the number one reason for the struggle that we're seeing with marriage within people your age, my age, and younger, the millennial crews, younger generations? What would be maybe a number one reason for the problems we're seeing?
Well, I remember growing up watching like Cinderella and thinking, if only I had a fairy tale marriage. Every girl wants that fairy tale marriage. There is a false expectation when it comes to marriage. And millennials have bought the line that, everything has to be perfect. I have to have all my T's crossed, my I's dotted. And that's just a false expectation. And in many cases, millennials are coming from broken homes themselves. We've not seen marriage lived out purely. And so it's caused us to have quite a negative view of marriage and institutions in general. And so I think one of the main things that millennials are struggling with is just that false expectation of what marriage is and what it isn't.
It's also kind of led to the trial marriage, right? You talk about people sliding versus deciding on cohabitation, and I think that feeds into that, right?
Oh, for sure, for sure. People are thinking, you know something, I don't want to make the same mistakes as my parents or my friends' parents. And so maybe out of convenience, maybe some of it financial, they're choosing to say, well, let's just give this a little try. And so they move in together. And obviously it doesn't end the way they think it's going to end.
And this is happening both inside and outside the church, we're
Absolutely.
noticing.
Absolutely.
And here on Stand in the Gap, obviously our focus is on a biblical worldview. You all have that. That's the focus of your ministry as well. And so that's very interesting that would be the number one issue. Now, Justin, I heard a song on the radio years ago, and it said something like, there's only two things that money can't buy, and that's true love and homegrown tomatoes. But I don't know, marriage does take money, and maybe you have to grow a garden to have a little more money, but marriage does take money. Where does that fit in? Is that one of the struggles that's causing some of the problems we're seeing? You're one of our go-to finance guys, and you're on some things with APN, with us, and that's one of the things you really research. Yeah. What's the effect having on millennial marriages because of finances?
After the false expectation, kind of the number one, or I guess the number two complaint that we hear or objection to marriage we hear is, I just can't afford to get married. So one is the fact that people need to focus on building a marriage, not a wedding. And so these extravagant $50,000, $60,000, $100,000 weddings, right, that are gone in one day, and yet they've not actually built a real foundation for a solid biblical Christ-centered marriage. And so that becomes a huge issue, part of that unrealistic expectations feeding into the financial piece. But the other big looming question is, as the predatory college loan practices continue to loom, more and more people have found themselves in deeper debt. And so that plays a huge factor into it. The debt-to-income ratio is now a factor in home loans. So the question is, I may find a wife, but I may not be able to afford a house. And so these are some serious considerations that couples today are having to contend with that even 15 years ago, couples didn't have to deal with.
And this is, again, most interesting. We could go a long way in this, Justin. We've talked about this, and Isaac just brought it up. On this program, we try to deal with problems, and we're talking about marriage, millennial marriage, and causes, and that's what we're talking about right now. How did we get to this circumstance? And then there are going to be solutions, and we're going to talk about that in the next segment. But it's interesting that in the ones we've mentioned so far, false expectations by millennials for what marriage will bring or will be, the fact that it is not the Alice in Wonderland experience you talked about, Jen, but in some cases I'm hearing, and I think, Justin, you've told me before, that actually some saying you don't want to go into marriage because it's bondage in marriage. It's really a twist and a turn, but the Bible has an answer to that, and we'll get to that. Finances also the Bible speaks to, and we just talked about that. But Jen, let me go back to you right now, because there is a third one as well in addition to those. What would you say from your research would be the third, perhaps, leading cause that millennials are choosing not to marry?
Well, pornography is playing a huge role in not being able to find a spouse. When Justin and I first started dating, that was one of the first questions I asked. Do you have a pornography addiction? And he didn't, thank the Lord. And we make sure that we put things around our marriage to protect us, to keep what God gave us, which is, He gave us sex, like it's not a dirty word, and to keep it pure and keep it holy before God. And so it's causing people to enter into marriage with a lot of insecurity, a lot of brokenness. Already there is distrust entering into the marriage because of pornography, and the church has not been immune to this.
Justin, I want to go to you. Most people, now you brought up the idea of pornography. that actually, on our Stand in the Gap radio program yesterday, I had a guest on, and we were talking about men and why men are not being men in America, why they are being silent, why they're not loving their wives, why they're not defending their children, why they are not taking leadership roles as God has designed them. And the answer from this individual was the number one reason is pornography. And pornography leads to passivity, and the man sitting back and not doing what the man needs to do. You've mentioned that, Jenn, as a third leading reason. Justin, I'm going to ask you, in this area of pornography, has it led to, because you haven't said it yet, but I don't know, I want to put this out there. I'm wondering if perhaps millennials have also not found good, positive examples to follow, and perhaps that's part of the reason they're not wanting to pursue marriage, and if perhaps pornography has not been an element perhaps that has factored into maybe why their parents or their parents' friends, perhaps marriages did not go right or ended in breakage. What do you say about that?
Absolutely. So, if we had to kind of nail down the fourth reason, I would say that it is due to the fact that a lot of millennials would say they don't have a good example of marriage intimately within their own circle. Part of that is because of maybe they come from a broken home or a divorced home, or even a Christian home where the parents have decided not to divorce, but in essence, they are separate. They live under the same roof because they don't believe in divorce, but they certainly don't have a strong, healthy marriage. And so at the nexus of a lot of these issues, pornography plays a huge role. Ease of access to pornography is unlike ever before. Years ago, you had to go to a seedy, dirty part of town to find pornography. And today, kids are able to access this on a smartphone on the way home from school on a bus. And so the limiting of that type of material is something that isn't really done. And so kids are able to access it, parents, big brothers, big sisters. And so all of that is fed into the problem of a stable, healthy role model. And when those seeds of pornography are planted into a marriage and into a relationship, it begins to rot the fruitful tree of that relationship from the core. And so many couples are struggling to find a healthy, godly, biblical example of what a marriage can look like. And so for some of us, it's looking to our grandparents. It's looking to that generation to see what a healthy marriage looks like. And so we chase after that. That's the model and the example. Even amongst our peers, I would say probably 40% of our peers are already divorced. And it's heartbreaking. But the reality is that in almost every one of those instances of divorce, there was an addiction to porn. And it's not just limited to men, by the way. It's also affecting women dramatically, because as more and more men are not finding sexual fulfillment through physical intimacy, they have to go to the pornography. It's created this hole in the women who feel like they have to participate in that as well. And inevitably, we also are seeing a dramatic rise of female pornographic addiction as well. And so both couples now end up in this vicious addiction, neither of them being able to find sexual fulfillment in each other because they've fallen for the cheap lust and sexual thrill of porn, whether it's live or it's recorded. The technology has gotten so advantageous that it literally is chasing people down right where they are from the access on their mobile devices.
Mm-hmm.
We could go for a long time on this, but we're not going to be able to because of this program. But ladies and gentlemen, as you're watching us right now, we're talking to Dr. Jenn Murff and her husband, Justin, talking about why millennials are not marrying, talking about the state of the millennial marriage union in America, and you are hearing, it is not good. Well, in this program, we're laying out the causes. We've done that so far. In our next program, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about solutions. Not just leave you hanging, but there are solutions. You already got the idea. The Bible holds the answers for all of the things that have been talked about, and that therein is hope. Now, we're going to conclude the program in just a minute by following up with some closing comments from Dr. Jenn Murff, and Isaac will pose those questions to her in just a moment.
Stand in the Gap is produced and recorded in the studios of WBPH Philadelphia, positively different television. To watch archives of this program, go to WBPH.org.
Welcome back to the program, and today we've been talking about marriage, and this doesn't just affect millennials or Generation Z. If you're watching, this is not just something for maybe your children or grandchildren. If you're an older person, it's not just for people who are married. The things we're talking about are affecting Christians and affecting Americans of all ages across the spectrum. But we are zeroing in and focusing on millennial marriage, these topics of what's hurting. And so we have Dr. Jenn Murff and Justin both have done research on marriage and on the finances and all these different parts of it. And they're bringing it in together for you, our viewers, to get a glimpse of this from a biblical worldview. And so as we wrap this up, Jenn, I just want to ask you, we've talked about these expectations, great expectations that aren't fulfilled then when marriage comes. Justin, we were talking about finances and the major struggles happening, but the big problems to come. And we've talked, really a lot of these kind of all tie into the fact that there's not a lot of good examples for people. There's not mentorship sometimes happening from maybe the parents, or maybe there have been godly parents, but there have been other negative examples that have kind of turned them against their parents. And then that's kind of where this other part of pornography comes in. That's just been running rampant, especially even in our children now, so that they don't even understand, how this is supposed to work. And so we bring all this back, and the Bible talks about it. In Ephesians 5, when it talks about husband and wife, Paul says that we are one body with Jesus, and he says that this mystery, he says, I speak concerning Christ and the church. So the Bible talks about this. And so, Jenn, all this research you've done, just in a couple minutes here, could you boil down, if our pastors, if our pulpits are speaking about what biblical sexual relationships are about, what biblical marriage is about, do you think that can help? Do you think that would make a difference with what's going on in millennial marriages?
Yes, I feel like the church kind of skirts around some issues within marriage. Here's the thing, if we don't talk about issues in the church that are plaguing culture, then they're going to find answers other places. It's okay to talk about sex. It's okay to talk about the state of the family. I think the church has the answers. And unfortunately, millennials aren't going to the church for the answers, which is also an issue. I read this quote. It says, boomers took relationships for granted and needed to build structures. That idea of if they build it, they will come. But millennials take structures for granted and need to build relationships. So here's the key, church. Build relationships with your millennials. Let them see what a godly marriage looks like. Let them see how important the family is, both to our nation, to the church, and for sustainability for years and years and years to come.
This is also where, despite the trend of church planting, which is great, and we are all about planting churches, healthy biblical churches are multi-generational. So when you have a church that's full of 500 people that are all in their 20s or 30s, it's really hard to actually have examples of mature, godly, Christ-centered relationships that we so desperately need to see and engage with. Between us and our parents, there's 11 marriages that we've seen in our parents. So we've made the decision early on not to repeat the mistakes of our parents.
And Justin and Jenn, we're going to have to run. We're at the close of the program. Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching a program here on marriage, millennial marriage. Today we've talked about the causes. This is part one. Part two, next week we're going to talk about the solutions. All of you who are watching understand the importance of marriage, I am sure. It's in trouble. We're talking about what we can do about it. We're going to talk next program what we can do about it and those solutions. If you enjoy watching this program, let us know, ladies and gentlemen. Let us know that God is speaking to you and helping you through this program. Contact us on our website. Let us know that. Partner with us in prayer. Partner with us in finances so this kind of messaging can continue.